What I'm about to reveal was buried by the most powerful men in history because it exposes their darkest secret. They're terrified of losing control. For over 200 years, they've hidden the story of a woman who didn't just beat them at their own game, she rewrote the rules entirely. Her name was Ching Shih. She rose from the absolute bottom of society's food chain to become the most feared commander in human history. She made grown emperors wet themselves in terror. She turned the world's most powerful navies into her personal playthings, and the way she did it will make your blood boil with how badass it really was. But what she did at the peak of her power is so ruthlessly brilliant, so absolutely savage, that it'll give you chills. I'm talking about a move so ice cold that modern billionaires study it to learn how to destroy their competition. You think you've seen power moves? You think you know what winning looks like? Wait until you hear how this story ends. It will shatter everything you thought you knew about domination.
Picture the most dangerous port city in Asia, where fortunes were made in blood and lost in a single night. The floating pleasure houses of the Pearl River weren't just about entertainment. They were the beating heart of a criminal underworld. This was where secrets were bought, where powerful men's weaknesses were exposed, and where the most valuable currency wasn't gold. It was information that could destroy lives. Here's what the history books won't tell you. These women weren't victims, they were puppet masters, pulling the strings of an empire. They knew which officials were taking bribes, which merchants were smuggling opium, and which nobles were plotting against the emperor. And Ching Shih, she was the spider at the centre of this deadly web, collecting every dirty secret, every whispered betrayal, every piece of blackmail material that would soon bring the most powerful men in Asia to their knees. Now, you're probably thinking you know where this story goes. You don't, because what happened next breaks every rule of how these stories are supposed to end. In 1801, the most feared pirate in the South China Sea, Ching Shih, walked in a her brothel. He wasn't looking for what you think, he was looking for an equal, someone as ruthless and brilliant as him. What he found was someone better. Their marriage wasn't just romantic, it was the beginning of the most terrifying naval empire in human history. And she was already planning his replacement.
When Ching Shih died, the Vultures circled immediately. Picture the most violent, bloodthirsty criminals in Asia smelling weakness. These weren't just pirates, they were warlords who had built their reputations on torture, betrayal and unspeakable cruelty. They walked into that room expecting to carve up a dead man's empire like a feast. What they found was a woman who had been planning this moment for years. In 72 hours, she pulled off the most savage corporate takeover in history. But she didn't use violence, she used something far more devastating. She exposed their secrets. She knew about their hidden treasure. She knew about their secret alliances. She knew which ones had been plotting against her husband. One by one, she gave each captain a choice: kneel before her and become richer than they'd ever imagined, or have their darkest secrets revealed to their enemies and watch their own crews tear them apart. Within a month, these stone-cold killers weren't just following her orders, they were worshipping her. But before I tell you how she did it, you need to understand the sheer scale of what she controlled, because the numbers will shock you.
Here's the scale of what she controlled, and these numbers will break your brain. 1,800 war vessels. That's 3 times larger than the US Navy today. 80,000 armed pirates under her direct command. To put that in perspective, that's larger than the Roman legions that conquered Europe. But the real genius wasn't the size of her fleet, it was how she organised it. She created the world's first criminal corporation, complete with HR policies, profit-sharing agreements, and a legal system that actually worked. Listen to these laws and tell me this woman wasn't absolutely ruthless. Disobey a direct order, your head gets separated from your shoulders. Touch a captive without permission, you die screaming. Desert your crew, we cut off your ears and leave you to bleed out. Steal from the Confederation, you get executed in front of everyone as a warning. Betray your brothers, we make sure your death becomes a legend of pain. But here's the twisted genius of it all. Merchants actually preferred dealing with her fleet over legitimate traders. Why? Because she kept her word, paid a tax, followed the rules, and you sailed safely. Cross her, and the South China Sea became your tomb. She turned piracy into a business so efficient, so terrifyingly organised, that legitimate governments started copying her methods. Now here's what her enemies didn't understand, and it cost them everything. She wasn't just a pirate, she was building something that had never existed before. And when 3 empires tried to destroy her, they learned why you don't mess with a woman who has nothing left to lose.
The 3 most powerful empires on Earth formed an unholy alliance for one purpose: destroy this woman before she destroyed them. The Qing dynasty, the Portuguese Empire, and the British East India Company, the same forces that had carved up continents and enslaved nations, were now united in terror of one former courtesan. This was the ultimate deathmatch, the largest naval war in Asian history. And what happened next was so brutal, so absolutely devastating, that the British kept the records classified for 150 years because they were too embarrassed to admit what she did to them. Battle after battle, she didn't just win, she humiliated them. She captured their finest admirals and made them watch as she burnt their ships. She stole their most advanced weapons and turned them against their own fleets. She used their own battle plans against them because her spy network had infiltrated their highest ranks. The British reported casualty numbers so catastrophic they refused to publish them. The Chinese emperor's treasury was emptied funding a war he couldn't win. The Portuguese begged for mercy. By 1810, she owned the South China Sea. The Chinese emperor was bankrupt. The British were retreating with their tails between their legs. The Portuguese were writing desperate letters begging for peace. She controlled the most profitable trade routes in the world. She could have declared herself empress and no one could have stopped her. She had unlimited wealth, unlimited power, and armies of men willing to die for her. Every revenge fantasy you've ever made, she was living it. So what does she do? Here's where this story becomes absolutely insane. She made them beg her to stop. And then she made the greatest power move in human history. Listen to what this absolute savage negotiated for herself. And remember, this is completely real. She didn't just win, she made her enemies pay her to retire in luxury. She kept 300 warships as her personal fleet. The emperor promoted her to admiral in his own navy. She kept every ounce of gold, every precious stone, every treasure she had plundered. She got a noble title that made her richer than most royalty. And here's the most ruthless part. She negotiated amnesty for 120,000 of her followers. She held the most powerful empire on earth hostage and made them reward her for it. It's the most savage retirement package in human history.
Here's what happened next, and why powerful people have spent centuries trying to erase this story. Ching Shih retired to Canton, opened the most exclusive gambling den in Asia, and lived like a queen until 1844. But here's the truth they're terrified of you learning. Her story proves that everything they tell you about knowing your place is complete garbage. The rules they say you can't break, she shattered them and got richer. The systems they say are unchangeable, she bent them to her will and forced them to serve her. The limitations they say are permanent, she proved they're just lies designed to keep you small. In a world where we're told to accept our circumstances, stay quiet, and be grateful for scraps, Ching Shih's story is the ultimate middle finger to every person who's ever tried to put you in a box. She didn't just break the glass ceiling, she obliterated it and made her enemies clean up the mess. She remains the most successful pirate leader in history, more successful, more ruthless, and more brilliant than any man who ever lived. And they tried to erase her story because her story is proof that the only limits that exist are the ones you accept. If this story taught you something they never taught in school, smash that like button, because there are dozens more stories like this that they try to erase from history. And if you want to discover the people who refuse to accept the world's limitations, subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what I uncover next. Remember, they tried to erase her story once, don't let them do it again.